Good evening, and thank you for joining for another session of our group, Naturally in Flames. So, today we're going to be talking about podcasting and how to start your own podcast. So, some of you might know I actually have my own podcast. It's called A Crazy Dream. I also have a podcast for From Mother's Garden. And A Crazy Dream focuses on dreamers who are taking action. And From Mother's Garden, of course, focuses on natural and holistic healing and wellness. So, this our session is really just to help you get started in podcasting. I'm going to say this up front. I'm not a podcasting expert. I'm not going to get into the Google Analytics, but I will touch on it just so you're aware that it exists. But this is just really for you to get like a basic intro into podcasting. So I want to start this conversation with us talking about basically, who your listener would be, because a lot of people want to start podcasts, but you're not really sure who you want to talk to, what you want to talk about. So for me, what's really helped is deciding on who I wanted to talk to. So when I started A Crazy Dream, I knew I wanted to talk to young entrepreneurs who were manifesting their visions. That was my goal. So I knew that these people were the people that I would be speaking to directly. I also knew that these people would be, mostly in that millennial age range, probably till their mid-40s, people who were, making that decision to step out and live their dreams. This affects not only the people I asked to have on my podcast, but also the conversations I have. So you really want to be clear about who you're talking to. And what they call this is your listener persona. Sorry, I'm still like a little congested. And I just ate pizza, which I probably shouldn't have done because it has cheese, which promotes mucus. And I know better. But I did go to Daddy Green's BK, which I talked about in the other video on window snacking. But anyways, your listener persona is basically like your ideal listener. Who is the person you want tuning in, listening in? Who is that person? So I want you to think about if you were in a room full of people and you were sharing that podcast, who would you want sitting in that room? Who would those listeners be? Who would be the people who would be sitting there tuned in every single week or every single day or every single month? Those are the people you really want to consider when you're thinking about that listener persona. Think about how old they are. Think about what they do for work, for employment, income. Think about what they eat. Think about how they dress. Think about the things that are important to them. So you might be like, well, this is what's important to me. That doesn't mean that those are the only things that are going to relate to your listeners. So you want to be very clear in understanding who your listeners are, what they're interested in. Because if you're having conversations and they're not interested, they're going to tune out. They're not going to check in. They're not going to be present. They're not going to... Hi, Lawrence. They're not going to want to know what you're doing. So you really want to be very clear about defining that listener persona. And it's good for you to, I would say, this is something that you want to do when you start. You don't want to wait to decide what your listener persona is once you start recording. And I'm going to be honest, that's something I did. When I first started my podcast, I just decided one day, I was like, I'm starting today. This is the day. This is how I do a lot of things. So I was sitting in the parking lot. I went and literally sat in the parking lot of, I think it's not Fairway, not Trader Joe's. It's a similar store. I'm gonna think of the name. But I went and sat in their parking lot. I had my radio on. I used my radio for songs, like, little intermissions. And I just decided to record. And I actually left that recording up. I'm doing well, Lawrence. Thank you for joining us. Oh, it's upside down for you? Okay, I thought it was only for me. Okay. But now it's upside down when I hold it, which is hilarious. But thank you for helping me to put that out. I don't know why it's like that. But so I was literally sitting in the parking lot and just recorded. I talked about pockets and my love of pockets. It was very random, very all over the place. So, for example, when I started the group Naturally Inflamed, there was a very specific group of people I wanted to talk to. You were the people I wanted to talk to. I was like, who are people who are experiencing similar issues? I was thinking about dialysis, kidney failure, my concerns. And I was like, how can I have a conversation with those people? So when you think about that persona, really get specific. Don't just generalize, get specific. Talk to those people. When I make these recordings, I'm talking to you. So, for someone who is on dialysis or someone who's had a kidney transplant, you might want to talk to people who are in similar situations. You might want to talk to people who are experiencing kidney failure. You might want to talk to people who are on dialysis or people who've had transplants. You can get more specific. You might want to talk to a certain age range. You might want to talk to men. You might want to talk to women. You might want to talk to parents or caretakers. Be very specific, because when that person tunes in, they're giving you their time and attention. So when you talk to them, like how I'm talking to you right now, Lawrence, and anyone else who listens to this, when you're talking to that person, you want to connect with them. So you don't want to waste their time. You want to give them value, and you want to make sure that conversation is one that has meaning for them. Okay, so, know your listener persona. So, they talk about demographics. So like I just said, where that person might live, the job they have, whether they have children, whether they have pets, what their social life is like, their hopes, their dreams, their challenges. So one of the things that was concerning me when I was in those Facebook groups, when I first, started really interacting on Facebook again, where I was a period, because I never really did before like this, I noticed that people were not really speaking to me. So people were talking and having conversations, and I felt like, yes, I can be a part of this conversation, but it didn't feel like the conversation I wanted to have. There felt like there was a conversation I wanted to have that was missing. And I wanted to talk to people who were like feeling limited, who wanted to, expand, who still wanted to grow, who were really interested and focused on growth no matter what. So I'm happy, that we all connected, because that's what we share in this group. That's what it's all about. And it's like, through having this group, now we're able to have community around these topics. So the next thing I want to touch on is, how you can be successful in your podcasting. So in your podcasting, there are different things that you can do to help you be successful. But then I want to really talk about what your idea of success is. Some people want to monetize their podcast. Some people just want to have a bunch of listeners. Some people just want a space where they can share, which is essentially what my podcast was in the beginning. And, there are different goals. So you have to be very clear about your goals. If you come into this with no goal, it's like you're going to just kind of do whatever, which is what I was doing for a while. It's like you're just going to do whatever comes to you. You're going to talk about whatever. You're going to be all over the place. Set goals. Like we talked about on the last session, mindset. You want to have goals. Very clearly set goals. So you know where you're going. You can really understand where you're at. And that way, when you're doing things, you're doing them with intention. You're doing them with purpose. So really understand what success means to you. So, for example, you might want to cover a very specific and unique topic. So understand what success looks like for you. For me, I want to see people start businesses on dialysis. I want to see people thrive and create options for themselves with kidney failure, transplants, post-transplant. That is my goal. So it is very important to me that I see people taking steps to do that. And it's very important to me that it's like I'll be able to engage with you. And Lawrence, you have not set up your free session, your coaching session, so please go and do that. So, and each of you listening, I want to have that conversation with you once a month, or we check in with each other, and where we're like, this is what I'm doing, this is what my goal is right now, this is what I've done. Because a lot of times we have people who support us, who are there for us, but they don't really understand what our goals are, and we don't really discuss that part of our focus with them. And so they're not really able to support us. And really, like, that is that time where it's like one-on-one, where it's like, what is it that you're doing? What are the issues? What are the things that we can overcome? And, what's the next step? So I want you to be very clear about your goals. So some of you might be starting, like Lawrence, or like the others watching, you might be starting something where it's just you. Or you might have a group of people that you're going to do your podcast with, or you might have a partner, co-host. So be very clear with your co-host and your group or whoever you are working with about what those goals are. So it's almost like you're taking a trip together. If we're going on a trip and I'm like, these are the directions, and my co-hosts have no idea where they're going or where we're going, but they're like, that's not where I wanted to go. Once we start driving, we're going to have some issues along the way. So you want to make sure that your co-host, your partners on that show understand what the vision is, And it's very important that you have a vision and have it clearly set, so that way you know that you choose the right co-host, that you choose the right partners for that podcast. You don't want people to come in and you want to talk about dating, and then these other people want to talk about medical care. You know what I mean? And it's like, yes, those two things can somehow cross paths. They can somehow, intermingle, but it's like, you want to make sure that you're on the same wavelength with your co-host, with your partners, so that way it's like you are taking that trip together. You can set out those directions very clearly, those steps, those action steps. And then that also affects how you choose guests. Some podcasts have guests, some podcasts don't have guests. So you want to really be clear about what kind of podcast you're going to have. Are you going to have guests on your show? Or is it going to be you just having a conversation with the public, with us? So be very clear about that. Think about that. And of course that can change, or maybe depending on the topic that changes, but your listeners are going to start to come to expect something from you. So imagine it's like, I've been doing this for a year, and then all of a sudden there's just like a person like sitting here with me, and you're like, where'd that person come from? You know what I mean? Of course there'll be introductions, but it's like people come to expect certain things from you. That's why they're watching. So you want to give them what they came for. You want to provide them with useful information. Hi, Vincent. Thanks for joining. And you want to make sure that you're providing quality content. So let's talk about planning, because we talked about how you choose that ideal listener, but you also want to sit and think about your shows. Yes, and mindset, direction, focus, those affect every aspect of our lives. Literally every single aspect. Thanks for joining, Patricia. When you're on your podcast, that mindset is going to translate to your listeners. So you don't want to come and make something, hi Amy, where it's like your whole goal is just to sell people something. Because think about how tiring that would be. If someone's listening into your show and all you're doing is selling, educate people. Provide them with value. Very similar to what I say in the group. I don't mind you selling your product. I don't mind you selling your service. I don't mind you promoting even your group, if you have another group, because that's something I've found difficulty with. But you really want to make sure that you're offering something of value. Teach the listener. Educate the listener. Give them a reason to be there. It's not all about you. It's about them. Okay, so let's really remind that. So again, we said planning. So when you're planning your show, and I wrote some notes for myself, so I just want to look down from time to time. We're going to focus on a topic, right? So every show can have different topics. So like I said, my overlying topic is kidney failure, thriving with kidney failure, thriving on dialysis, thriving with a transplant, or, as a caretaker of someone who's in these situations. But they're underlying topics. So we're doing a topic today on podcasting, right? The last one was on mindset. So the topics, they're like, those underlying topics can change, but that overhead topic remains the same. So the only reason we're doing this is because I know podcasting is a great way for people who are on dialysis, or who are, busy, who have transplants, who are going through the transplant process, to share, to educate, to create options, to create income. Hi, Louie. So remember, you want to pick a topic, because that topic is going to be why people show up. And those underlying topics are ways that you can continue the conversation, where you can enrich everybody who's listening. But you want to be clear about what that over and underlying topic is, because that is why people are going to continue to listen to you. So now you want to think about what you're really bringing to this conversation, right? So like I said, when I joined these Facebook groups, I saw there was a lot of support, there was a lot of love, a lot of sharing. But what I didn't see was a focus on us creating options for ourselves, was a focus on us monetizing our experiences, our abilities, in the face of the adversity that we're facing or the difficulties that we deal with. And I was like, that's a conversation I want to have. That's important to me, because I know that this is something that will affect the rest of my life and the lives of many other people, as you all listening have been affected. So I was like, okay, what is a unique perspective that I have when it comes to this topic? So then I looked at myself, and really take a minute before you do this, in that planning station, think about yourself. What is it that you can offer to the conversation that you want to have? And also, like, what can you offer to the conversation that's currently existing, like, in existence? You could listen to some other podcasts, see what people are talking about, see what they're not talking about. Think about your experiences. Like, what's your expertise? What can you really bring to that conversation? So, for example, like in the group right now, there's Louis Garcia. He's familiar with cannabis. So, he's familiar with, dialysis and cannabis. So, that is something that he could educate people on. So, really think about your expertise, your knowledge, what you can offer to a group of people with similar experiences. And perhaps these people don't even have similar experiences, but you can offer them something of value because of your experiences and your expertise. I have been working since I was a child. And not like child labor, but I was working in my family's businesses from the time I was a little girl. I used to do stock. I used to sell penny candy before I could even reach into the penny candy part of the counter. You know what I mean? Bachman chips, like, I was all up in the factories, you know what I mean? And yes, Louis is saying his knowledge is still somewhat illegal. And even knowing that, you know what I mean? That's still knowledge because not everyone knows that. So I'm just saying, be aware of what your limitations are and also what your skills and your expertise might be. But, my expertise is in, I love entrepreneurship. When I was a little girl, I told people I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I love playing Monopoly. I love being the banker. And I knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. Like, there was no doubt in my mind. I actually wanted to be a city planner. I interned in civil engineering for 4 years. I had the steel-toe boots still to this day to prove it, and the corns on my toes that it caused. But I knew that I wanted to build, period. So my expertise is in building. So when I meet people, I'm always like, oh, what did they just say to me? Okay, Amy said it's 100% legal in Michigan. So for my Michigan people, got your cannabis options right there, okay? But I knew that was something I wanted to share with the world, period. When I have conversations with people and they're talking to me, I'm always like, how can I make a business of this? Oh, that's a business name. Oh, that's a product. Oh, you should write that down. Really think about those things in conversations that get you excited. Like, what lights you up? Like, part of the reason this group is called Naturally Inflamed, why I chose that name, why I love that name, is because, first of all, inflammation is part of what causes kidney failure in almost every single case. Diabetes, high blood pressure, like that inflammation is the issue. But it's like that inner light. Like, what do you have inside of you that is like beaming out, that gets you excited? Like, what can you share with the public? So Amy's on this, right? She does Beachbody. She focuses on wellness. She's excited about wellness, exercise, like, share that. And Patricia, you're saying like you're trying to figure out how to get started in selling baked goods, and how you bake when you're stressed. So if you bake every day, Patricia, that's something you can share with the world. You can share recipes that's what you can share in your podcast. You can share recipes for people with kidney failure, for people who are on dialysis, for people who are post-transplant. You could share low potassium, low phosphorus options in baked goods. You could share ways where people can make baked goods low glycemic. It's funny because I started out selling baked goods on the streets of Brooklyn, and I used to sell gluten-free cookies and cakes, and that's how I got started in skincare, because a barber asked me if I would make him hair care. So you'd be surprised where you could even start having that conversation, and it could take you a whole nother way. And like Patricia's saying, she shares recipes with the text. Think about what it is that you're passionate about and how you can share that. And if you're already sharing that thing, get on a podcast and share that. So like Amy's saying, farmers markets, you could literally have a podcast where you go to farmers markets and talk to the farmers about their practices, the difference between organic versus locally grown versus, conventional versus, like, you could talk and learn about the pesticides and tell us about the different vegetables and what's in season versus not in season. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of people don't know these basic things. Well, it's basic to people who know it, but to the rest of the world, it's not basic. Someone once told me, it's like, I don't even know what I know. Like, a lot of times you don't realize that you're an expert in something because to you it's just what you know. But to a whole world of people, what you know and what you can share is novel and new information. So if there's something that you're already sharing, really think about how you can organize those thoughts and have conversations around those topics. So now I want to talk to you about organizing those thoughts, because whenever you do something, you want to have a strategy. You don't just want to go in like I did it and like, I figure things out. I just jump in. But you want to have a strategy. So I am really, I'm based on a site called Blog Talk Radio. And without even signing up, you can actually go into their best practices section and their help section. I'm not getting paid to talk about them. I'm not going to post a link for an affiliate code. Like, I'm literally just sharing this. But they have an outline of like everything that could help you with starting your podcast. And I'm actually using that to help me do this conversation, because I would say, I learn along the way and I learn these things, but they have a really organized way of presenting this information. So I was like, hey, like, use the experts. And yeah, there are a lot of outbreaks going on right now because I guess the FDA is not able to check everything. Or I don't know if they're doing it again, but I guess some things got through. But look and see like what foods are on the list, because they said like fresh grown produce, or like some of the things like packaged salads they said you want to stay away from. So like the ones that you buy that are like pre-prepped in the stores. So really know like what you should be eating and what you should not be eating right now until things clear up. Hi Angela, thanks for joining. I'm happy Angela joined because Angela just started doing her videos, and we will definitely be checking out and sharing each other's podcasts, because this group is for sharing and for support. So if you started a podcast, if you are doing videos, post them in the group, because we can give you feedback. We can learn from each other. We can share each other's podcasts and help each other. We can subscribe to each other's channels, because, when I joined YouTube, they didn't care how many people you had for you to monetize. Now you have to have, I think it's 10,000 subscribers before you can even monetize. So we have to help each other build each other's channels too. So it's always great to help each other build. Okay. So we were talking about planning. So some people wing it. I'm going to be honest. I do a lot of winging things. I'm not going to suggest this for anyone else, because a lot of people are not as good at winging it as I am. I am a special case. So you want to really think about how long you're going to be on. You want to think about the different points of that conversation that you're having that day. You want to think about the conclusion. You want to think about the things that you want to make sure you include in that conversation. So let me give you an example. When I first started doing interviews, I didn't set time limits. So I had one interview. It was a great interview, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. But it became a 2-hour interview. And while I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and it's still up there, thanks for watching, Lawrence. Yeah, so exactly, Patricia. Like, everyone's not good at winging it. And it's like, while I enjoyed that conversation, and I feel like that conversation was therapeutic for the guest, most people don't want to listen to a 2-hour interview. Like, I always try to play 10-hour audiobooks for people and irritate the heck out of them. Most people don't want to sit and listen to that. Most people want to know, like, exactly how much of their time you're going to take up. They want to know exactly what you're going to share, and they want to have an idea of, like, where it's going. So I don't watch the news often, but what I do notice about the news is that they tell you, this is happening at this time. This is happening at this time. This is going to happen at this time. They give you a breakdown of what to expect. Just like when you write a paper, you're like, this is going to happen here. This is going to happen here. These are the topics I'm going to touch on. And then there's an intro and a conclusion. You want to follow very much that same format for your show. So you want to choose a time period, and maybe you want to practice doing your podcast before you decide on this. Maybe like you practice on your own, or you practice, and not have it be, to the public in the beginning. And yeah, some people do get nervous, some people ramble, and that's why I say, like, you don't have to make those initial podcasts public. I did, because I was like, I don't know, it's funny to me how I went on to a little ramble about pockets and my love of pockets. But some people don't want to share that. They don't want that out there, and that's understandable. So practice, get on there. Maybe start at 15 minutes and, you do like that simple outline. The intro, what you're going to touch on, what's going to happen at these different time periods. You don't have to give it very, very strict, like this is at this minute, so that way you're tied in like that. But be like, these are the topics we're going to touch on during this conversation, and then you have your conclusion. So where you're going. Like we talked about that trip, where you're going. You know where you're starting, and your stops along the way. So it's like you want to be very clear with that, because that keeps you on point. So it's almost like when you give a speech, right? When I did public speaking, I failed public speaking the first time. I was horrible. I used to get the jitters. I used to get nervous. I used to try to read everything off the paper. Now I know. I don't need a piece of paper with every single word on it. I need a couple key points to keep me on track, and I need to make sure I cover the topics that I want to cover. And that's, again, why you want to speak on things that are in your expertise. You want to speak on things that you're knowledgeable about. So what are you more knowledgeable about than your own experience? You know, as someone who's experienced kidney failure or, you know, chronic illness or transplant, dialysis, you are more knowledgeable in your experience than anybody else. And it's natural to get nervous. It's natural in the beginning, especially, to ramble, because most people are not used to having conversations that are one-sided like this. And it's not one-sided because I'm communicating with you, but most people are not on your podcast. It will sometimes very much be one-sided. It's like you're speaking out into the world and no one's really there interacting with you. So unlike how on a live, you're talking to me, Patricia, Amy, you know, on your podcast, it could just be you. You can make it where it's just you speaking. You can make it where you have listeners, callers. You know, you can have a call-in number. That's your option. You can do it live. You can do it pre-recorded. So you can record it and then post it. So you have options as to what you want to do. And again, like I told you, you know, I use Blog Talk Radio, but there are other options for you. What I like about Blog Talk Radio is that they made it where I could share it across iTunes, Stitcher. They made it where I could share it across all these different platforms very easily. And I really thought that that was a great way for me to get started. But look at options that appeal to you. You might want to do a SoundCloud because you might just want to do a YouTube. You might want to just do Facebook Lives and then share that information across the different platforms. You know, it's up to you. You know, this is your podcast. So do what you want to do with it. Be very clear about what you want to do with it, though. Do you want to monetize? Because if you want to monetize, then you need to look for sponsors. So you need to look for people who will pay to be on the show, or people who will pay to be talked about on the show, or people who will sponsor your show, that episode, you know what I mean? Maybe that series. So you really want to think about asking people if they're interested, if you want to monetize. And of course, putting it on these different platforms that offer ways for you to monetize your show will also help. On Blog Talk Radio, they offer an incentive program for listens. So those listens are really how you show that your show is growing. So yeah, exactly. You want to make it easy to share. And it is easy to share. I would say on Blog Talk Radio is like the really simple, I mean, it's one of the simplest ones I found when I was looking. But, you know, if you find something better, let me know, because I'm always open to learning and we can share that in the group. So what they talk about on Blog Talk Radio is having your mission statement and your listener personas. Because when you create that mission statement, no matter what that conversation does or where you go with that conversation, you know that there are certain things you always want to bring it back to. I know what I always want to bring it back to. And you want to make sure you're very clear about that, because remember, that listener is listening in for those things you promised them. Give them what they came for. Give them more than what they came for, but make sure you always give them what they came for. Okay? Remember what I said. Choose a length. Stick to that length. When you have a guest on the show, or if you have guests, let the guest know beforehand. You know, and you might want to talk to a lawyer about release statements. You know what I mean? Because people come on the show and they might decide, like, I don't want you to share this interview. Did they give you permission to use that information, to use their voice, to use their likeness? So you want to talk to a lawyer or consult with a legal professional about release statements, you know, information release. Because when you have someone on the show, if you want to share that, you're not just sharing your information, your voice, your story, you're also sharing theirs. So make sure you get that from them, or again, speak to a legal professional, but explore what your options are regarding release statements, because you want to release it and you want to have the right to release it, and you want to have the right to manipulate that conversation. You want to be able to not manipulate in a negative way, but literally take chunks out, change, you know, pull it apart so you can pull quotes, you know, because you can take that podcast, you have audio, right? But you might want to take that audio and then make posts where you're promoting it, but you're taking quotes and you're tagging them, or you're taking their picture with a quote. You want to have the right to do that. So make sure you talk to that person or the people coming on your show about your right to do that. And I love that. See, like Patricia's saying, like tonight she made a sweet and sour chicken recipe, so she could do a podcast about the recipes. Exactly. So yes, the recipes you're doing are a great way to start a podcast. And because it's the DaVita recipe, you could reach out to DaVita and see if they'll be a sponsor. You could reach out to companies like DaVita and see if they'll be sponsors. You could reach out to people in DaVita groups or in kidney failure groups and post your recipe. Host that podcast. That's how you find listeners. So this is what we're talking about. You want to go where your listeners are. You also want to put your listeners to you. So you want to ask them to subscribe. You want to ask them to share. But you want to think about, that's why that listener persona is very important. Where are your listeners? What do they do? What are they eating? What are their difficulties? What are the things they need help with? How can you support them? So we know that DaVita offers recipes for people with kidney failure. Low potassium, low phosphorus. Like, that's the goal. Low salt. You know what I mean? So maybe you want to talk to high sodium groups. Maybe you want to talk to diabetics. Maybe you want to talk to people with high blood pressure. You want to really think about your listeners, where they are, because that's where you're going to find them. So you always want to have that listener persona in mind, because those are the people you're talking to. Those are the people you're going to share with. That's who's going to spread that information. That's who's going to support you. Go where the support is. Don't go trying to find people who don't care about what you're talking about. That was something I struggled with. I was trying to get people who were not interested in entrepreneurship. I was talking to people who were not interested in certain things, and I'm like, well, why is this not working? They're not my listeners. They're not my target audience. They're not a part of that listener persona group. So be very clear about that. If you learn nothing else from this, learn that. It's like in any business. You have a target market. You have a target audience. Be very clear about who that is. Everyone's not going to care about what you're talking about. But there are people who are on the way to caring. So that might be another audience you want to touch on once you've really saturated that audience that is interested. So it's like, once you fill this up, come over here and go find these other people. And yeah, like, a lot of people are going to struggle with that potassium, with that phosphorus, and that's a conversation you can have. You can even have guests on that talk about those issues. You can have guests on that are experts. You can have nutritionists, for example, or if you want to focus on kidney failure, maybe you have a nephrologist on the show. Like, for example, I want to have people come on who talk about employment rights. You know what I mean? I want to have, and this group is all about ideas. Like, I want to have people come on who maybe legal professionals, accountants, you know what I mean? So you know what your rights are when you're getting disability. So it's like, really, really think about what will benefit those listeners, because that helps you pick guests, topics, that helps you find followers, subscribers, all of that. I'm just going to take a little sip. My mom told me to keep something to drink nearby because I get thirsty. Okay. So, the next thing we're going to talk about, I got tea in my teeth. Okay. Content. So, a lot of times we think content, we just think about, like, I got tea in my teeth. Okay. Mom, I blame this on you. We talk about content. We think about, like, SEO. We think about our social media. But think about a calendar, right? And creating, like, a little content catalog for yourself. So that way, when you're running out of ideas, or when you're like, I don't know what to talk about, you can go to that content calendar and be like, oh, here's an idea. So, yeah, I know, right? I recently spoke to Amy on the phone, and we talked about mind mapping. Now, mind mapping, I learned about this when I was studying psychology. You take one idea, and then you just literally put it in a circle, and you just let your mind flow wherever it takes you, and you just draw little connections. So, for example, we were talking about, and I got it out. We were talking about recipes. Patricia's saying she does recipes, based off the DaVita catalog or the DaVita offerings. So then we would talk that on your mind map, you might put recipes in the middle. Then you could go low phosphorus, low potassium, low sodium, low glycemic. So then, like, all of these give us another direction to go in, right? Because now, when you talk about phosphorus, you might want to talk about the risk of having high phosphorus. What are some of the dangers of high phosphorus? What are some of the dangers of high potassium? What are some of the dangers of high sodium when you're living with kidney failure, but also just in general? Heart failure, heart attack. You know what I mean? You might educate people on those things on a show. When you talk about the mind mapping, when you're talking about low sodium, you might say, like, who are some of the people who care about sodium, high blood pressure? You know what I mean? Kidney failure. It's like you let your mind just flow and you just map it. And that literally gives you a content catalog that you can work with and build on. And you can just make that a running list. So that way when you're like, well, what can I talk about today? Oh, I don't know what to talk about. I'm all out of topics. There you go. Boom. Write on your mind map. And you might want to create a calendar. Because, again, I'm going to say, this group has helped me with organizing. Because usually I just get on and I just talk about whatever I want on my podcast and my other things. I did a podcast at 3 a.m. in the morning the other day. One of my podcasts is really just like my outlet for me to like share my random thoughts. But for you, you might want to have a calendar where you're like, this day we're going to do this. This day we're going to do that. And that's what I've done in this group. I'm like, this day we're going to do this. This day we're going to do that. You know what I mean? So that way you know, you might not hear from me for 2 days, but you know, on Tuesday at 9 p.m., I'm most likely going to be on live doing a video. All right? And I'm going to let you know ahead of time what that video is going to be. So you want to really think about creating that calendar because you also want to be very disciplined. You don't want people to be showing up and looking for you. You know what I mean? It's almost like you're showing up at a store and it's always closed. And you're like, come on, like, what are your hours? You know what I mean? So you want to be very clear about when they should expect you, what they should expect to hear on that next show, what they should expect to hear, period. But you want to keep them coming back and knowing like, oh, okay, next week we're going to touch on this thing. Maybe this month we're going to focus on this thing, and next week we're going to focus on this thing. Or tomorrow we're going to focus on this. So you want to create that calendar to help you stay on point, but also to give them a reason to come back, to know when they should be back, to know what to be looking out for, and to like share it, because then they can tell their friends like, hey, this day, this time, we could all listen to this. We could all learn. I'm sorry, I got a call. So you really want to think about that calendar because that'll help you stay on track with what you need to do and help your listeners stay on track with what to expect and what's going on. So you want to select episode topics that really position you, you know. And some of the things I've listened to, they talk about, you know, becoming an authority, right? So when your listeners are listening to you, they're not listening to you because you're just like any random person. They're like, no, this person knows what they're talking about. That's why I'm showing up for you. So really, don't pick topics that you know you're not an authority on. If there's, like the other day, we talked about mindset. I could talk about mindset for hours. I listen to audiobooks every single day. Okay? I've been doing this for years. I study psychology. Certain topics I'm very comfortable with speaking on. You know what I mean? I lost 70 pounds in the last 2 years. I'm comfortable having a conversation about weight loss and the mindset around weight loss. My kidneys failed. I'm comfortable with that conversation. My condition, Wegener's granulomatosis or ANCA. I'm comfortable having certain conversations. But if you ask me to speak to you about sewing, I'm not the expert on that. So imagine if I just start a podcast tomorrow and I'm like, oh, sewing. And I'm like, I don't really know what I'm talking about. Yes, I could become an authority, but it's like, I'm not the expert on sewing. I'm not the person you want to come to if you bust your pants open. I'm going to hand sew it and, you know, it'll be closed, but I don't know how long it's going to last. I mean, it might last a long time because I might overdo it even. But it's like, be the podcast people come to for what you're an authority on. Become an authority. Position yourself as an authority because your podcast can lead to speaking engagements. You can use that as a platform for a book. You can use that as a platform for a documentary. It's like your podcast is a place where you can promote whatever you want. But that's a place where it's like you've found your tribe and you can share and you can learn and grow together. And your tribe can learn and grow. And then it's like you're all growing now. So everybody's winning. So really, really think about what you want to be an authority on, what you are an authority on, and positioning yourself. Because if your goal is to perhaps create documentaries, then it's like you want to share certain things, you know, or like Patricia, maybe you want to have a cooking show. So you want to keep that goal in mind, share recipes, maybe be like, hey, this next day or this day, we're going to be doing video. Tune in to this channel. Now you can cross market your YouTube, your podcast. So now you have a vlog and a podcast. Or you could be like, tune into Instagram. I'm going to be posting some pictures of this recipe there. I'm going to be posting the recipe here. So you really want to think about like how you can cross market and again, like what those goals are. So that way it's like you keep that in mind. So we're coming up to, you know, like the end. because I want to be mindful of like time again, because I feel like sometimes the other day I didn't have like a clock and I just like kept going, and then I was like, oh my gosh, we're almost done, or actually we went over. But you know, you want to look at, when it comes to SEO, you can literally go on Google and type in the word that you're interested in and get words around that topic that come up. I'm going to give you an example of that, right? So I'm going on google.com, and I'm doing this live because I want you to really understand how this works. And Patricia, like you said, like a blog can help you through things. Like I started this group because I wanted to support you, but I also wanted a space for myself to be able to have the kind of experience I wanted to have in community with other people. You know what I mean? I wanted to be able to support, offer information, but also learn from you all. You know what I mean? Like it gets me excited when you are like, yo, I did this thing. You know what I mean? I was scared to do, or I'm starting this new thing. Like I love that. Like I love it, because I know that by us creating options, by us like letting go of that fear, or even doing it afraid, because that's what my mom said to me the other day. She was talking about doing it afraid. And, you know, I'm going to share a story about doing it afraid at the end of this video. But it's like, yo, like a lot of the stuff is scary. It's new. You know, some people are not comfortable with technology. But at the end of the day, you can learn. There are guides available. Like I talked about that Blog Talk Radio guide. There are so many YouTube videos available. When you set up that session with me, we could literally go through stuff one-on-one in those 20 minutes. But I'm going to type in recipe, right? Recipe for people with kidney failure, right? So, all right, that was a lot. Okay, so we're just going to type in recipe. Okay, so when you type in recipe, it literally gives you the top searches on Google. So utilize this, because you can use that in your SEO. So if you know that the top recipe searches, right? Recipes with ground beef, recipes with chicken, recipes for dinner, recipe for meatloaf, recipe for banana bread, recipe for coquito, recipe for chili, recipe for sugar cookies, recipe for lasagna, you know those are the top recipes people are looking for. Which means when you're talking to people who are in your specific listener persona, you might want to give them recipes with ground beef, chicken, dinner recipes, because you know this is stuff they're looking for, right? Let's say you want to focus on people who are on dialysis, right? Because I know, Angela, that's your focus, right? So we would type in, it'll be home dialysis, right? Right, Angela? So home dialysis, right? When you type in home dialysis, top searches, home dialysis machine, home peritoneal dialysis, home dialysis cost, home hemodialysis versus peritoneal dialysis, home dialysis services, home dialysis machine cost, home dialysis nurse. So these are things you can use when you're thinking about your SEO. So you might want to talk about the machines that are available, the machine that you use, the options that you have. You might want to talk about how much it costs you, the cost out of pocket, the cost covered by insurance. You might want to talk about why you chose home hemodialysis versus peritoneal versus in-center. You might want to talk about home dialysis nurses and your experience with them, what they come and help you with, what they don't help you with. So, Amy, I want to touch on yours too, because I know you do Beachbody, right? And you're working with me as well. So when you type in Beachbody on Google, and this is literally a Google search, and it's like, I want you to really utilize this because this helps you with your blogging, because when people search online, that's how you get found. It's your SEO. So literally in your blogs, then you use these words, and it's going to help people, you show up higher in the searches. YouTube, your blog, whatever you're doing. So this applies to hashtags. This applies to across the board, everything. So when you type in Beachbody, Beachbody on demand, Beachbody on demand login. So you might even have an article where you're like, if you lost your login, how you find that. Beachbody workout, Beachbody tanning, Beachbody coach, Beachbody diet, Beachbody yoga. So you might want to bring them things that touch on that. So yeah, so it's like exactly like really utilize that. Exactly, Patricia, like utilize the topics around those conversations. Or like we said, that mind mapping. You run out of ideas for your mind map, go right on Google and type in some of those words that are on your mind map. And then get those examples and use those things to help you get ideas. So this is just a way for you to always have content, for you to build out your content calendar, for you to speak to things that people actually care about and want to know. Because if you're out here talking, if you were in the group and I was like, listen, I'm going to do a podcast for children, you know, you're going to be like, What do I need to listen to that? Like, I wouldn't listen to it. I don't have any children. I have a nephew. I might tell my brother to listen to it, but I'm not really that interested right now. You know, like, you want to make sure you're speaking to the things that are interest or of interest to the people you're looking for. And then you want to do these things I'm talking about on Google, and that's just one thing. We're going to have another session like this, you know, but you want to really make sure you're giving them the content that they're looking for, and that you're showing up in the spaces that they are searching. Because if you're not, then it's like you're screaming into a room full of people a bunch of stuff they don't care about, and no one's going to listen. No one's going to subscribe. No one's going to follow. No one's going to tune in next week. Like, you come back, right? Like, we've come back and had these conversations because it makes sense. But if it didn't make sense, I wouldn't blame you for not showing up. So be aware of those things. So today we talked about content, creating your content, your mission statement, your co-host. Exactly, it has to be relevant. We talked about creating a plan, you know, and I'm going to say we could do the next session. We could talk about naming your podcast. We could talk about finding guests for your podcast, because that is something I have a lot of fun doing and I know I could speak on. We can talk about, you know, more podcasting in the next session. I'm going to be specific in the group and I'll make a actual name for it. But I want to have more of a conversation around this because I want to really support you with that. And I also want to talk to you about that anxiety around speaking and public speaking, and, you know, just like the stress that can go along with it, because I understand some people might not want to do it because of that, but we're going to have a short conversation about that in that next session too. So I'm going to post this to YouTube so you can share it. Thank you all for joining. I really appreciate you all. If you have not had a one-on-one with me yet, please sign up for our 20-minute session, because January is almost over and you get 20 minutes a month. Use those 20 minutes. Like, those 20 minutes, and I stick to that 20-minute thing because I want to make it where it's like we both are like in agreement and where we put that time to really like build. But like those 20 minutes, I'm 100% focused on you. And yeah, like, let's do this. All right, so everybody, Patricia, sign up for your session like tonight, going from mothersgarden.com. All right, we're going to do our next session the same time next week, Tuesday, 9 p.m. to 9:45. Apply these things I just talked about. Let me know in the group how they're helping you. Share your podcast, share your channels, share your business. Share this information because it crosses boundaries. You know, a lot of people are working on things and just are looking for support. Like, share this information because, like, we can all use it. All right, and I'll talk to you all soon. Have a nice night. Take care. And stay naturally inflamed. Stay lit.